Take a deep breath in. Hold. 1, 2, 3. And breathe out. Deep breathing is an incredible tool for reducing stress levels and bringing awareness to the present. Welcome to Normalize The Conversation. I'm your host, Francesca Reicheter, and today I'm joined by mental health advocate, breathwork facilitator, and podcast host, Bryan Piatt. Bryan is creating a safe space to talk about mental health by hosting the Take What Serves and Leave the Rest podcast. Bryan is taking his love for mental health advocacy into a professional career as a grad student in mental health counseling. Join us as Bryan opens up about his own mental health journey, the value of breathwork, and the difficulty of expressing your emotions publicly. Bryan, thank you so much for joining me today. I am super excited for this conversation, but before we jump in, I really want to check in with you. How are you really?
Great question. It's the question that we aren't always asking each other, right? Most days. You know what? I'm doing okay today. I think one of the things that I know when it comes to my mental health that I tend to struggle with is like this kind of foundational feeling that there's like something wrong with me, or that like there's something like deeply wrong with me. I feel like that, like when I think about a lot of what I struggle with, like it all kind of funnels back sometimes to that core belief, which is kind of so heartbreaking to say out loud. But I'm noticing that like that kind of shame stuff for me is a little bit present today. So that's present as I step into this conversation with you. But I also am grateful for the tools that I have to kind of ride those waves. So I'm riding the waves this morning.
It's so hard when you kind of feel ashamed, like something's wrong with you. That's something I also struggle with, especially for me. I don't know if this resonates with you, but by having these tools and knowing what to do and still not feeling great, or like it's just not working in that moment, I get so frustrated and overwhelmed because I'm like, what's wrong with me that I have the tools, I have the knowledge, I am working on being able to help other people through this, and yet right now I just can't get myself through this moment.
Yeah, so true. And I think it, sometimes, especially doing, like mental health advocacy work and speaking out and, like you said, holding space and helping other people, sometimes it starts to feel like I'm supposed to have all my stuff together before I can do that. And the reality is that, I'm still a human. You're still a human, just trying to do the best that we can, like day in and day out. And I'm grateful for a lot of the progress that I've made, and I can see a lot of the growth that I've made in my life. And I think also so important to kind of be gentle with myself too, that when I get into these places where it's hard, I can like be gentle with myself through that process and not try to beat myself up too much.
It's so important to be gentle with ourselves because it's a lifelong process and lifelong journey.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so hard to recognize that. Like, I might feel great today and great tomorrow, might feel great for like a year. And then suddenly it's a
Yeah.
process, it's a journey. You have your ups and your downs, your mountains, your climbs, and getting to that point of accepting that that's kind of how it is and working through it, and then being willing to use your voice, your information, your tools to advocate for others, and then also be in school to become a therapist and want to do it in a professional career aspect as well is incredible. What inspired you to go down this road?
Yeah, I think a lot of it for me has been just my own experience with, just going through what I've gone through when it comes to my mental health. I started struggling really bad with anxiety and a lot of kind of OCD symptoms when I was in middle school. And I lived a lot of my life not really knowing what was going on with me. Like I knew that there was something happening, something felt off, something felt like but I had no way to like, I didn't really know how to verbalize it. There wasn't a lot of, back when I was going through that, there wasn't as much conversation around mental health back then when I was in middle school. And so I think, you know, going through a lot of my life struggling personally to kind of getting to this point of speaking out and kind of using, I have a background in broadcast journalism, was kind of my career before I made this shift into the mental health world, and really lucky to have a platform where I could talk about some of these things and reach people. And that's been really, really meaningful work. And then during the pandemic, I kind of, like a lot of people, I think, realized, I think it's kind of time to make a shift, and I think it's time to actually start doing this work full time. And really, I've been wanting to do it for a really long time. And so I decided to jump into the grad school process, and honestly, not really knowing, do I really even want to become a therapist, but it just felt like this is the next step, and we'll kind of let it like unfold moment by moment. And the more that I've gotten into it, I think I've realized that I want to keep doing the work that I'm doing kind of on a broader scale with mental health advocacy, but also I think really craving working one-on-one with people and being able to help people in that way too. I'm ready to kind of step into that layer of the process.
That is incredible. I resonate with so much of your journey from those days in middle school of not knowing. I live with bipolar 2 disorder and not knowing
Mm.
what was kind of wrong with me, knowing something was not right, but not what it was, not having the language to explain how I was feeling,
Yeah.
thinking, internalizing it, because when I would have these breakdowns and these fits, it was grow up, you're too old for this, get over it, stop acting like a baby. So I internalized a lot of it, didn't have the language to express, and it spiraled for a
Mm-hmm.
while. And then to get to that point where it was right in the beginning of the pandemic for me, starting that advocacy work, starting the nonprofit, starting the podcast, working toward applying to grad school to become a therapist, kind of that same kind of very similar journey, very similar path.
Yeah.
How are you liking school and working toward becoming a therapist? I had an exam last night. Not a fan right now.
You had what last night? An
An
exam?
exam, a midterm on Halloween.
Oh no. Yeah. Luckily, I have to say my program, I think that I've only had one actual exam. Most of them have all been like papers and more project based.
Yeah,
Exams are stressful. The whole like
they
right and
are.
wrong of everything. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's super stressful. It's been great. I think it's very different going to school at this phase of my life. I'm a little older, so I turned 37 actually this month, which is wild. So it's nice to be learning about something that I genuinely care about, versus, not that I didn't care about what I was learning about when I was in like undergrad, but it was a much different, just let's just kind of work the system and get good grades and get out of there kind
yeah,
of an approach. And whereas now it's like there's genuine interest in actually learning. And some classes are I love, some classes I can't stand, and like everything in between. But I feel it just kind of feels like the right thing to do, just to kind of take that next step in my career. And I think there's the reality of obviously wanting to help people, and I think also learning, like, how do I make a living doing this? How do I financially
yeah,
support myself? I think that's a real key piece of all of this is, um, if I feel very passionate and called to do this work, and there's also the reality of existing in our society, and how do I make money doing it, and how do I provide a living for
yeah.
myself doing it? And so I think this is going to really help me in that process of kind of laying a foundation to be able to support other people.
Same. It's the work we're doing is so amazing, so needed, but it doesn't necessarily lead to financial stability and being able to afford
Right.
the cost of living and being alive.
Yep.
So to kind of move into a career and figure out a way to do this, that's something you're so passionate about for a living and be able to actually make money doing it, is incredible and
Yeah.
overwhelming journey to say the least. which brings me to breath work and being able to find an outlet to breathe in the midst. For me, I started breath work in the beginning of when I was starting my master's, and it helped so much for me to catch my breath again and feel
Mm.
more in control. With the severe anxiety, my heart rate will get so high that I think I'm having a heart attack, and I just
Yeah.
can't catch my breath. I genuinely am hyperventilating on the floor. So breath work has been an amazing tool for me to just be able to, again, catch my breath, feel in control, as
Yeah.
well as just relax and calm down and get to a space of clarity, kind of
Yeah.
being able to reset, restart, and get through. What inspired you to kind of go into facilitating breath work? And first,
Yeah.
actually, can you explain more about what breath work is?
Yes, absolutely. I love talking about breath work. It's like my favorite thing right now. So how do I describe breath work? I find that breath work is one of those things that you kind of have to experience yourself, because I think everybody's going to like have their own experience with it. I think there's a lot of different ways that we can use our breath. Like I think our breath, what I find so beautiful and powerful about it is that it doesn't cost us anything and it's with us at all times. Like it's this thing that is with us always, and we can utilize it to help like regulate our nervous system and connect to our bodies. And so there's so many different ways that we can do that. We can slow down the breath. We can do like things like box breathing and really, taking slow, more drawn out, intentional breaths that's going to kind of calm and soothe the nervous system. And then there's also a lot of the breath work that I've really dove into over the last several years is actually more of a kind of an activation of the breath. So it's like techniques of breathing where we're actually almost like firing up the breath, speeding up the breath for an extended period of time to actually move energy in our body and kind of I have found it's one of the most powerful ways that I've been able to kind of guide myself away from the noise of my mind and really getting into my body. And so you'll hear a lot of different terms out there under the breath work umbrella. There's things like holotropic breath work. There's a guy named Wim Hof. The Wim Hof method is really, really big in the breath work world right now. I trained under a guy named David Elliott, who teaches a three-part breath. And so it's where we're breathing in and out of the mouth. It's like breathing into the belly, breathing into the chest, and then releasing for kind of an extended, we'll do that for like upwards of like 20 to 25 minutes, which sounds wild, but really doing that for an extended period of time and then releasing the breath and really opening up to some pretty powerful and beautiful, like deep meditative spaces. So there's a lot of different ways to describe breath work, but I ultimately foundationally describe it as a way to use the breath to connect to our bodies. We're living so much of our life up in our minds, and that's where at least that's where I tend to get myself into trouble, is trying to live from the shoulders up. And I find breath work helps me connect to my body from the shoulders down and kind of live a more embodied way of life.
That's like the perfect definition of what breath work is. It's kind of like a gateway to meditation, is what my breath
Yeah.
work coach would call it. I can't really get myself to meditate. In the beginning, when I was first kind of post psych ward,
Mm-hmm.
meditating for like a minute or two, I could kind of do. I would sit with my mom and we would just like close our eyes and take deep breaths and try to get myself to a space of calm. But
Yep.
since then, cannot keep my mind just, I can't sit still like that. My mind is
Yeah.
going and going and going. And with breath work, I found that focusing on my breath keeps my mind from over. It's like
Mm-hmm.
the one thing that can calm me down.
Yeah.
Whereas sitting in silence and just not focusing on my breath that way did not work for me. But I did that same the three breaths, breathing in your belly, your chest, and then the exhale.
Yeah.
Amazing. I can tell you the first time my body was like kind of shaking a little. It
Yeah.
was such an incredible experience. I was like,
Yes.
wow.
Yeah, it's powerful stuff. And it, a lot of times, when we really dive in and do some of these really deep breath work practices, like I talked about, there's a lot of tingling sensations that happen in the body. There's a lot of like lightheadedness that can come up, which I know for
Yeah.
people who struggle with anxiety and things like that, they can be pretty jarring initially because those
Yeah.
sensations can really, be a little triggering. But it one of the most powerful things that I've found with breath work is an ability to it helps me release emotion in a way that I've never really been able to do before. I've been somebody who it's hard to access like my emotional body a lot of times. Like it's almost like I've learned how to like dissociate from that over the years and just kind of think my way through emotions without actually feeling the
Yeah.
emotion that's happening in my body. And so breath work is a great way for me to just lay down, tap into the practice and cry or, let out healthy anger, let out frustration, like whatever's in my body, just giving it away, like to be expressed is something that I've found just so powerful for me personally as somebody that is kind of at this stage of my life learning what it's like to feel emotions and not just think about them. They're two very different things.
It is. And learning to feel and express in a healthy way can be
Yeah.
so difficult. I know
Mhm.
in my experience expressing my emotions, I could not put words to what I was feeling in the beginning. I could not, it was just on the floor crying or like screaming,
Yeah.
maybe throwing my phone. Went through way
Yep.
too many phones from that. Just not having a way to feel any kind of control over what I was feeling or express
Mhm.
in a way that made sense to get through the emotion, because the only thing that came out
Yeah.
of the like anger throwing my phone was more anger that my phone was broken. It was not, it
Yes.
was a vicious cycle. It was not healthy in any way. It was not helping me move through the emotion. It was not helping me understand where it was coming from. It was just these
Mm.
kind of spontaneous reactions.
Yeah. Yeah. And we kind of live in a world that isn't always the most conducive to allowing ourselves to feel our emotions and find ways to express them in a healthy way. Like we're just that doesn't seem to be a priority that we've decided as a society. Like we're going to teach
Yeah.
people how to be in their bodies and feel their emotions. As simple as that sounds, that's kind of um, it's a real journey to like learn how to do that in a healthy way. And I do think there's a lot of struggle that happens when we don't let ourselves cry or we don't let
Yeah.
ourselves just kind of feel what's there. Like I mean I was doing an interview on my podcast with a musician. Her name is Allegra Miles, and we were talking about how like crying is kind of our like it's become like one of my new favorite things. Like as silly as that sounds, like it's a cathartic experience to like let myself cry, and I usually find there's actually kind of this like temporary almost release of the grip of my mind when I let myself cry. Like I'm
Yeah.
like thinking, ruminating, and then when I like let myself cry or like express emotion, there's a release on the other side of that that doesn't last forever, but it's like a temporary kind of release. Like my body just kind of sometimes wants to feel what's there and not um overcomplicating it by just trying to think about it with my mind.
I heard this quote one time, how like all these stressors in our lives are like this fire within us, and eventually it just kind of overwhelms, and our tears are the way we're putting out that fire. They're the
Mhm.
water. We're extinguishing it. So for me, that offered a lot of peace in this feeling that I was crying or wanting to cry. I tried to hold it in for so long because growing up, again, those invalidating phrases of you can't cry, you can't act like this, you don't want people to see you crying. That was all
Yeah.
the messaging I was getting, because that's, again, society doesn't prioritize expressing our emotions. It doesn't prioritize allowing us to feel and process and heal and move forward. It prioritizes this idea that strength comes from constant resilience And resilience comes from not
Yeah.
crying, not allowing yourself to fall down and stay down for a little bit before getting back up. It's you fall and have to get back up right away. And there's only so many times we can do that before we are going to stay down, and not because we want to give ourselves the space, but because it's like it feels physically impossible to get back up.
Hmm. And it's isolating. I found like that
Yeah.
way of being is a very isolating thing. I know that's something that I'm working on very much in my life, and I kind of have this default setting within me, where when I'm feeling like quote unquote messy or emotional or struggling, instead of leaning into people, which is what I need the most, I tend to just withdraw and kind of isolate and try to like wait until I feel good and pulled together before I kind of reemerge back into the world and back into my relationships. And I it's been really really deep work for me to kind of recognize that pattern and recognize, like, learn how to be emotional in front of other people, or not always be pulled together and on, and like all, like, for me there's a lot of that kind of messaging that I've picked up throughout my life of, just be the really nice one and really pulled together, and just only, like, it's like only express positive emotions to the world, like that's all that you're allowed to do, which is so not what being a human is about. It's we all experience such a huge range of emotions every day, and it's deep work learning how to integrate all of that, and definitely something that I'm gonna be working on for a long time, I think, in my life.
Same. And it's so like easy as an advocate, as someone who wants to help others, to feel like you have to put on that face, especially with social
Hmm.
media, and look like you have it all together. And
Yeah.
recently I realized that I would get a lot of DMs from people asking, like, how do you do it? Looking at what you're doing and all that you're accomplishing, I feel so inferior. Like I'm not doing enough. Like I'm not handling
Mm.
enough. And that really opened my eyes to how, because I'm so like that person who's like, be authentic on social media. And I'll like share honest posts about how I'm feeling, but it kind of goes over people's heads in that way because they don't see it. They see like this person who's smiling all the time and
Yeah.
surrounded by people and doing these podcast episodes or publishing these books or doing these speaking engagements. Like that's all they really see from the images. So I went on
Hmm.
my Instagram story like maybe 2 weeks ago, and I like showed pictures of my face without 6 layers of concealer on. And I was like, I feel like I'm physically dying 95% of the time when I
Yeah.
don't have to have this much makeup on my face to look like I'm awake and alive. This is what I actually look like and feel like. And everyone thought I
Mm.
was sick. I was like, I'm not sick. This is genuinely how I look and how I feel. And it's like this constant level of burnout and trying to take care of myself, but trying to produce enough so that I can be helpful or perceived as good enough for
Yeah.
myself internally and to others. So even that sharing what you're really feeling and what you're kind of going through can be so difficult because people's
Yes.
responses can be like they're genuinely concerned for your health and safety at
Totally.
that point.
And it makes share, at least for me, it makes sharing kind of scary sometimes, because
Yeah.
it's, I mean, because I'm constantly maneuvering that question in my mind of, like, what's a healthy amount of sharing for me to put out there on social media, and when does it cross over into maybe not the healthiest thing for me? And I do find that it always kind of comes back to, like, what are other people going to think of me if I'm really vulnerable and open about what I'm going through? Are they going to think I'm just wanting attention, and like all of that kind of rhetoric starts to
Yeah.
take hold? But I do, this is where, man, the broader conversation around social media is so fascinating to me, because on the one hand, I think it's doing awful things to our brains, and the comparison and all the toxicity
Yes.
that comes with social media. And I know, like when I've really been struggling, social media has been such a source of hope and connection to connect with other advocates and people being open about their experiences of what they're going through. It's given me a lot of comfort too. And so I try to like always remind myself that no matter what people think about when, what I'm sharing, I guess at the end of the day, the intention is trying to reach that one person who is feeling like they're the only one that's struggling and that there's something wrong with them. And I think we have to find ways to reach and put out more content like that through social media to like get through this illusion that everybody else has it all pulled together and I'm the only one that's struggling. Like it's so toxic and it's everywhere right now.
It is. And it's so, for me, I constantly follow and unfollow accounts because I'm like, I really like this person, like I want to follow. And then I'm like, it's so frustrating to see sometimes like how lavish their lifestyle seems and like all these great things that they can do. And I'm like, I want to be able to do stuff like this. And it's just not feasible. Whereas other
Yeah.
people may get to kind of go out on Halloween and have fun. I'm taking an
Yeah.
exam and then laying in bed and trying to rebrand and figure out new color schemes. And
Yeah.
it can be so overwhelming, that comparison game of other people have the luxury of time to have fun. They have all these financial resources. They have all these friends who are showing up. And I'm like by myself in a hotel every other day trying to just
Mhm.
figure out the next step.
Yeah. And sometimes that's all we know, right? It's like,
Mhm.
what's the next step? like no idea what the step is going to be beyond that, but what is the next step? And I think about that a lot. There's something within me that feels so called to do this work. I guess that's like always how I've described it. Like I feel like there's like a deeper calling happening in my life to like help other people. Like it feels very like soul-based work for me. And I also don't want to live my life feeling like strapped to the work or like feel like I'm sacrificing personal relationships or like the things that really matter in life, like human connection and all of that. Because living in, I worked for a number of years in broadcast journalism with, kind of this career that from the outside looking in, man, it looked like I had it all pulled together. Like I had on paper, I kind of I had everything that you're supposed that kind of defines success. And I think I was like so disconnected from myself, and I was so disconnected from like I was almost living for just like only the approval of other people and kind of the flashiness of the job. And as I really step into this new layer of my career, it's really really important to me to maintain that, step into the work and help other people, but also like not lose sight of the fact that like the foundational things in life that really matter, like just connecting with family and friends and loved ones and making sure I'm investing more in that than my career.
Yes, and making that shift can be so difficult. Not only is there like other people's opinions, but then that own kind of fear within yourself, is this the right move?
Yeah.
How did you kind of navigate making that shift?
Yeah. It was a long time coming. It was building for a long time. I think this definitely wasn't like a rash decision that I just woke up one day and was like, I'm gonna switch careers. Like this had been building for me for a really long time. I actually thought about when I was graduating, undergrad, I thought about going into psychology in grad school back then. So this would have been back in like 2008. But I had already invested all this time in this whole broadcasting degree. And I was like, I need to at least give it a shot. I need to like step in and give this TV thing a try, and ended up working out, and kind of one thing led to another. And I'm really, really grateful for the path that I went on with that. And it's definitely brought me to where I am today. Met so many wonderful people along the way, had so many great experiences. And yet at the same time, there was always this kind of like undercurrents that was within me where I kind of knew that this was the type of like this helping and talking about like mental health and just giving people a safe space to like be human, I guess, was very much like always there within me. And I always felt like I was being nudged in that direction. Um, and so I guess the pandemic mixed with that kind of undercurrent that had been there for a long time, it was just like, hey, it's time to make a change. And I, that you bring up the right and making the right decision. My brain thrives on black and white thinking or all or nothing thinking, feeling like I always have to make the right decision about something. And I've really had to learn in my life how to invite uncertainty along for the ride, and
Yeah.
recognize that there's never, I don't know that there really are right and wrong decisions. There's just decisions that we make and we do the best that we can with them. And, I have a good dear friend who always talks about like the 80% rule, like sometimes it's not about being 100% certain about something. It's like, can you get to the 80%? Like, can you get to 80% and say like, 80% of me wants to do this. And then sometimes just living by that has really helped me to like recognize that there's always going to be that space where we don't really know whether it's getting into a relationship or making a career move. Like, are we ever 100% certain that this is the right thing for us?
I
I would
love that.
argue no. Like we have to learn how to live to some extent with the uncertainty of all the decisions that we make.
I love that outlook because there's always going to be uncertainty. And I think that kind of prevents so many people from making a next step. Is
Yeah.
that what if it doesn't work out? That's so normal to like question it. It's so
Yeah.
normal to just not know. We can't know. The world is so unpredictable. I mean, look at 2020, the pandemic shut everything down. That wasn't something we could
Yeah.
predict. And
Yeah.
knowing that it's okay to live in a space of uncertainty, but chase after what makes you smile, what makes you happy, if
Yes.
that's the right time for you. And it's different for everyone.
And I think, and I would add with that that I've often described it as doing work, like work, no matter what we're doing with our lives and our career, like there's going to be an element of it's going to be hard. Like there's going to be sacrifices, there's going to be hard work that we have to put in, there's going to be stress. It's more like for me, it was deciding what am I willing to endure that stress for? Like am I to me it feels worth it to feel stressed out sometimes or overwhelmed sometimes by this work that I'm stepping into and this career, because at the end of the day I think it matters to help other people and to like talk about these things, and mental health and wellness and all of that are things that I care deeply about, and so I'm willing to be uncomfortable for that, I guess, is kind of how I would describe it.
I love that. I feel like that describes how I feel too. Just
Mm-hmm.
loving the idea that you could save one person's life, loving the
Yeah.
idea that you can use, like, I can use what I've learned and what I've gone through to maybe just spark a tiny bit of hope in someone else, something that I desperately needed at the time. And I didn't
Yes.
see a voice at that time giving me that kind of feeling of hope.
I think back to, so for me, a lot of what I've gone through has been struggling with kind of this anxiety and obsessive compulsive tendency of my mind. And so I've done a lot of advocacy work in the OCD community and really helping to get um, accurate information out there about a disorder in OCD that's really misunderstood. Like a lot of people out
Yeah.
there are struggling with a lot of symptoms around that and kind of have no idea because of a lot of the misunderstandings around it. But I just think back to when I've been in really dark places, like the podcasts that I've listened to that have totally shifted my entire day, or the post on social media that just made me feel even for 10 minutes less alone. And I think about like the events that I attended and heard people speak, like all of those things were just these little nudges along the way of like lifting me up and helping me feel less alone and lifting some of the shame. And it's like if I can do that for somebody else now moving forward, that's the goal. Is just planting these little things out there into the world where we can hopefully reach people and just um, remind them that they're okay and that there's nothing wrong with them.
I love that. It can feel so isolating, like we said before. It can feel so overwhelmingly isolating when you don't
Yes.
know, when you don't have accurate information, when you're wondering, why am I having these thoughts? Why am I responding this way? And having all this
Yep.
misinformation I mean, OCD, I think, is one of the most misinformed
Yeah.
disorder because people think it genuinely is like lining up your shoes or organizing your closet a certain way. So it can be, again, I
Hmm.
can't think of another word, but isolating when you're having
Yes.
these kind of thoughts and feelings and not being able to put it into words and not being able to explain to someone else
Yep.
because it's often minimized in other people's minds.
Yes. And that's what breaks my heart around OCD is, you know, there's a term out there, and I would encourage people to look it up. It's called pure OCD. It's kind of uh, a term used for kind of the manifestation of OCD that is more like people experiencing intrusive thoughts in their mind that are then followed up by mental compulsions that are not visible. Like these are all like mental, like ruminating and checking and counting and praying and like all of these things that happen in the mind that nobody sees. And so, a lot of people think of OCD as just like you just said, being organized or being tidy or washing your hands. And, the washing your hands thing obviously is a very real thing for a lot of people. And there's so many ways that it manifests that we don't talk about. And a lot of times what our minds latch onto with OCD are really shame inducing thoughts. So people questioning having thoughts of harming somebody else. Why am I thinking about that? That must mean that I'm a bad person. Or things, latching onto things around sexuality and our minds creating this really elaborate story that there's something terribly wrong with us and we're a monster or something. For why am I having that thought? And so there's just an immense amount of shame happening for people who struggle with this. And that's one of the hardest pieces to maneuver. I know for me, I mean, I still experience it kind of day in and day out. But I just at least have the tools now to kind of ride those waves a little bit better than I used to.
What are some of those tools, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah. Foundationally, uh, it was learning how to not always get anxiety or uncertainty to go away, but learning how to live with the discomfort of those things and kind of inviting those things along for the ride. That was something that when I really dove into like proper treatment around OCD, that shifted everything for me because I was kind of living, and I can still get kind of sucked into this way of being sometimes where it's like I need to do all the things to feel good, and I need to get all the anxiety to go away before I can live my life. And I've realized how freeing it is that instead of being overly consumed with feeling good all the time, it's like how do I learn how to feel anxiety and move with it and still show up for my days? Or how do I sit with uncertainty and kind of let that, like, not have to have my mind come up with a final answer about whatever it is that I'm ruminating about, because that'll never happen. My mind's always going to come up with more questions. And so that was really foundational, kind of shifting my perspective with that. um Meditation, breath work, connecting to my body are huge things for me. I and that kind of looks different every day. I really love the word recently, embodied, like trying to be in a more of an embodied space, like connecting to my physical body and not just ruminating and living so much of my life up in my mind. um and there's so much. I love the analogy of just like a mental health toolkit. All these different things that kind of work together, not to take everything away, not to take the struggle away, but just to at least get me into a place where I can draw upon my tools a little bit more effectively. So I
Yeah.
see therapists. I take medication. Medication has been helpful for me. Trying to get some good sleep, trying to connect, not isolate. all those things I think work together to just make things a little bit more smooth.
Thank you for sharing. The mental health toolkit, I think, is something that's so underrated and not talked about enough. I
Mm-hmm.
I firmly believe that there's this misconception that people have that it's just going to be one thing that works. So they're kind of
Totally.
trying to find that one thing, and as soon as it works for something, it's like, okay, that's it, I found my tool. And
Mm-hmm.
when it doesn't work, it's like, what's wrong with me? I'm broken, I'm falling apart, like I
Mm-hmm.
can't, it's out of my control, and it kind of spirals into this feeling of hopelessness.
Yeah.
So I know for me, building that toolkit, and when I built it, I focused on all the things that worked for different emotions as well, because sometimes what worked for anxiety did not work for like this feeling of anger, this feeling of
Yeah.
burnout. So making a list of maybe 3 things that worked for each emotion in the past, and it's constantly changing, constantly updating. Like I said in the beginning, I
Mm-hmm.
thought meditation was this really great tool for me, and now it's something that genuinely just doesn't work. I used
Yep.
to go for runs, loved running. Now, do not ask me to run. It's never going to happen. I am never going to run. The only thing I run is my mouth.
Hmm.
So, so finding tools that kind of work for me in the space that I'm at now has been so helpful. Bryan, you have been absolutely incredible today. As we begin to wrap up, what is one message of hope that you would like to offer the audience?
Mm. I always come back to the word gentle, like be gentle with yourself. And I know that's it's such an easier thing to say than do sometimes. But I really just encourage people out there listening that our minds are going to come up with all these really elaborate, scary, overwhelming stories about ourselves or the world that we're living in and our present moment. And like that is not a representation of who you are. I really think as human beings, we're much deeper than the noise of our minds. And so I just encourage people to be really gentle with themselves when those stories get really, really strong. And I also think small, steady steps forward really make a huge difference. So I've
That
really, yeah, I've really recognized just, for me, sometimes it's just getting out the door and going to the coffee shop and sending an email. As simple as that might be, helps to just provide a little bit of forward momentum with my day that can help a lot. And so, you don't have to reinvent the wheel every single day, but I just think steady steps forward can make a huge difference.
being gentle with yourself and steady steps forward is amazing, amazing advice. Bryan, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you so much for listening to Normalize the Conversation. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. This podcast is an initiative of Inspiring My Generation, focusing on normalizing the conversation, bringing education and awareness to the forefront, and amplifying global voices to spark change and hope. Inspiring My Generation is a 501c3 nonprofit organization on a mission towards suicide prevention through awareness, conversation, education, and support. Connect with us on Instagram at Inspiring My Generation and visit our website inspiringmygeneration.org to learn more about our work and how you can make a difference.